Can you retire early on just $500,000? This is a big question for people because once you hit that $500,000 mark, you'll need to know, can I quit working or can I not? Am I stuck in this golden handcuff situation in my job, or can I go ahead and retire and live the good life? Let's do some math together on a spreadsheet so you can see everything that I'm doing, and we can talk through the numbers to figure out if you could retire or if you need to keep working. So let's go into the spreadsheet now, and I'll do a little picture-in-picture so you can still see me. Hello. So the big question is, how do we figure this out, and how much income are we going to get off $500,000 invested? Now, if you've got your 500 grand in, let's say, paid off real estate, and that's cash flowing a large amount of money enough to cover your living expenses, then you're already good, and you can probably do that math for yourself. For the rest of us who don't have paid off real estate, who's just cash flowing like crazy, we're probably invested in the stock market, and most of us aren't crazy high yield dividend investors. Most of us are actually just kind of in S&P 500s or other kind of index funds, and so the bulk of us will go off of the numbers that are based around that. Let's go ahead and start to get some numbers here into the spreadsheet. So we'll start with a nest egg amount of $500,000. The tricky thing here with some of these age-old adages like the 4% rule, or like any kind of rule of thumb that says you should save and invest a certain amount, things like that, they're useful for a starting point. But the problem is whenever we get down to the nitty-gritty and apply it to wherever we are right now based on inflation and everything else that's happening to us, those things may not always apply that well. So speaking of the 4% rule, let's start there. If you don't have it memorized, the 4% rule is basically saying you take your entire nest egg that you have invested and you multiply that by 4%. So if we do that now, we can see that our starting point was 500 grand, which is an objectively ton of money. It's $500,000 that you have essentially in cash. It's invested, but you have the money. And what the 4% rule tells us is the first year of retirement, you could only safely withdraw $20,000 of that. Maybe if you're living in a yurt outside the Grand Canyon, you can do that, and that's fine because all you got to do is like buy some food here and there and you're good. But for most of us, that's not enough money to live on. Another assumption that's part of the 4% rule is that the vast majority of the money that you have invested is in equities. So if you're in like 70 or 80% bonds, this doesn't even really apply to you. You're not even playing in the same rules as the rest of us who are mostly in equities and a little bit in something like bonds or something else along those lines that's really conservative, fixed income, that kind of stuff. Of course, cash doesn't really play a factor in the 4% rule at all because it's not invested. It's not growing. Now you might say, but, right now, my cash is doing better than my stock market investments. And you'd be right, mine is too. We've got cash in the M1 Finance checking account. Well, not the checking account now because I just canceled that, but the M1 Finance savings account that's making 5% interest. That's pretty incredible. 5%, zero risk, FDIC insured. Why would we not put all of our money there? And yeah, technically now for the short term, that is the most appealing thing to do. To put it in treasuries, to put it in something like a high yield savings account, even CDs, all that stuff is really appealing. And I saw this week that you can get up to a 5-year CD at like 4.6%. And so something like that is pretty tempting if you have that short of a time horizon, or if you're really concerned about a current volatile period, like maybe you've got some bad juju going on, you think something's going to happen to where the stock market might actually crash because every other news report is some recession that's impending. If that's where you're at, I think that you probably should have a good amount of money in cash in that case because that just makes sense for you. I'm not your financial advisor, so don't take this as such, but you've got to tailor all of this to you and your needs. So if you're the average American and you're making something like $55,000 a year before retirement, then you need to be making around 80% of that in retirement because typically your expenses do go down when you're retired. Things get a little simpler. You're not commuting as much. You're not having to buy stuff for work, all that. So only 80% of 55 grand is what you need. And 55 is really what people make before taxes. So let's say you take home something closer to 45. So right now, let's say you're making 45,000 after taxes and you want to make 80% of that once you're retired. That means you really only need $36,000 in retirement if you're someone around there in the average. So what we have here is a gap of $16,000 between what your investments should be able to safely allow you to withdraw each year. That's what the 4% rule is telling us, versus what your realistic needs will be in retirement, which is closer to, let's be honest, almost double that. So what are our options here? At first glance, this is a bummer because what this is saying is I need 36 grand. My investments can only safely hold a withdrawal of 20 grand per year. And so this is scary because I need almost double what my investments can give me. But there's something that people don't talk about enough in the personal finance space, and that's called Baristify. It sounds like someone is becoming a barista, like you've been baristified, but it's not that. The plan that Baristify puts out there is basically just saying whatever your investments cover is good, but whenever you need more than that, if it's just a small amount, you can get something that's a simple, easy, straightforward job, get out of your current higher paying, but also higher stress, higher time commitment, higher responsibility job, leave that behind and retire into a simple job, like being a barista. Simpler. If you're a barista and your job is hard, don't leave me any hate comments because I appreciate you. You make some good coffee. This is just the name that has been given to this level of financial independence and retiring early from the community as a whole. You might call it ditch digger fi or lawnmower fi or whatever other kind of like straightforward, easier occupation that you can retire into to allow you to have a lot more freedom in life overall. And to be clear, the 4% rule isn't a static 4% for forever. So what this is saying is your very first year, when you've taken out that 20 grand, it should be able to withstand it. Then the next year, you do 20 grand plus whatever the inflation rate was. And so if inflation went up 10%, you'd add 10% on that just to kind of cover your living expenses, give yourself a cost of living increase, basically. And so this number is probably different for you every single year because let's say inflation does go crazy and you're at 22,000 in year number 2. And then it goes crazy again and you're at 24,200 the next year, and so on and so forth. Maybe it's not so bad the next year you're at 25,000. But the plan is, for what's happening is, as you're giving yourself these raises, your investments are also increasing, and they're increasing at a higher rate than this 4% or 4.2% or whatever it is, because the goal is that you can maintain your principal balance while withdrawing this amount safely for maybe not the rest of your life, but almost indefinitely. I mean, the tests that were done to test out the 4% rule were done over a span of, I believe, 30 years. So that's a pretty long retirement period. But we have another problem. What we're talking about here is early retirement. So what if you're 45 and you probably have another 45 years to live? Can you rely on this kind of data? Can you rely on these numbers or not? Unfortunately, the odds are probably not. So let's start over. The wise thing for us to do in this situation when we have a longer retirement horizon in terms of 40, 50 years, or if we're risk averse, or if we frankly think that we can't count on returns being as good as they have been in the past, our course of action is to have a smaller, safe withdrawal rate. The 4% rule is nice and tidy and straightforward, and it works within the boundaries of what it was set up to do. Now we're breaking those boundaries. So if anything, we need to have a 3.5, 3.2% safe withdrawal rate to protect our investments. So what does that look like, and how does that affect what we can actually retire with here? Here, this is silly. Let me move myself over. There, that's better. So instead of this being a 4% withdrawal in that first year, let's say we're going to do a 3.5% withdrawal to be that much more cautious, to protect against any more downturns, to extend our safe time horizon. Look what it did. It dropped our overall amount by $2,500. And that makes sense. I mean, dropping a 0.5% in your safe withdrawal rate is a huge amount. And so now we need something closer to $20,000 to make up the difference between our actual in retirement take home pay that we need, which is this $36,000 number, and the $17,500 that we expect to be able to safely withdraw from our investments. So what are our options here in this case? We're burned out. We've got $500K invested. We've got to get out of here. What do we do? Well, obviously you can downgrade your lifestyle. Duh, that's an option. But for $17,500, you're not going to really live anywhere. You could switch jobs and try and find something else that isn't as terrible as your current situation, which I'd be very tempted to do. If things were that bad, I would seriously consider even a lateral move within the same industry to a different company, a different role, something like that, where perhaps your expertise can be enough of a critical mass to make the position actually pretty easy for you, where you're still getting a decent amount of pay, you're not barista-fying, you're not lawnmower-fying, you're not relying on some kind of basic job or hustle to make your income happen. You can still get paid well, but for you, it's an easy job. For you, it's well within your wheelhouse and your experience and things like that. I think that could be really wise. In my opinion, a big mistake that people make in this kind of situation, or let's say you're not early retiring and you're 68 and you have 500 grand and you know that you need more money than that, something that people do that in my mind is not worth the risk, is not worth your livelihood, and that's going after exceedingly risky investments or going with unproven investment companies. This is where people get scammed. When we feel like we're pinched in a corner, we don't have a lot of options, we don't have anywhere to turn, I've got to make more than the 7 or 8% that the S&P should be earning. How do I do that? How do I find someone who's got the magic sauce? And then our guard goes down, and frankly, we just become too gullible because we need something, and this person is promising us that we're going to get it. They're promising us they have what we need to make our ends meet. I think the fallacy here is thinking that those kinds of yields and those kinds of safe returns are just out there, and all we have to do is go and ask and find them. Like, oh, I'll just sign up for this guy who's never done any kind of financial investing before, but he says I can have this annuity that'll pay me a guaranteed 11% no matter what for the rest of my life. I'm doing that. And then we stop asking questions and we just believe this person because if he's right, it actually does solve all of our problems. And I think the sketchy thing is that we stop asking questions. No matter what, the biggest favor we can do for ourselves when it comes to the financial life that we're living is to continue to ask questions and continue to learn. Okay, buddy, you say it's an 11% return. What is this stuff invested in? What happens if the stuff it's invested in goes way down in value? What happens if 2008 happens again? Probably won't, but what would happen? Let's say in theory, what would happen? Also, really importantly, if we're talking about something like annuities, what about the fees? Can you explain the fee structure to me in detail so that at the end I can have an actual net return, not just this gross return at the beginning, this big fat promise of 11%. I want to know after every single fee what I'm actually making out the door. It's going to be a lot less than 11%. So for those of us that are interested in retiring early, for those of us that have something like 500 grand invested, in my mind, we are not ready. We've got to keep working to some capacity to make the income continue to flow. And even at this point, I don't really want to pull 17 grand out of my investments every year. I'd rather sit there and let them grow and continue to work. If I could retire today, I would, but that's frankly, in my mind, with these numbers, not an option, especially if your burn numbers are higher than this, which ours are. The problem too is that whenever you're making decent money, you get used to spending decent amounts of money. And so then to suddenly consider something like early retirement, if you haven't been a frugal monk, it's really, really hard. We've got to really downgrade a lot of things. I read an article this week that said that the average American, and I believe it was the average American millennial, thinks that we need $1.3 million to retire. Seems like a nice big round number. $1 million doesn't feel like enough. Inflation has murdered all of our incomes and all of our spending power. So maybe we bump it up to 1.3. Let's do that math and see if that changes anything significantly. All we have to do is pop 1.3 million into this top cell and see what happens. So there we go. If you had a 3.5% withdrawal rate because you were going to have a longer retirement or a safer retirement, you could withdraw 45.5 per year and sleep pretty easy. Still not a ton of money. If you went from making 125 to suddenly taking home 45, that's going to be rough for you. There's something in these numbers, though, that people overlook far too often, and that's the difference in taxes from your investments versus taxes from your day job. Whenever we're getting taxed from a W-2 paycheck, that's like the worst case scenario. We're getting taxed at the very highest rates for our ordinary income, is what that's called. Our ordinary income is the worst. Now, if you set this up right, there's a real chance that your $1.3 million invested, those of you that have this money and are thinking about doing this right now, could be 100% tax-free. There's actually a number of different ways where that could happen. The first one, which is the simplest way it could be totally tax-free, is if that's all invested in a Roth IRA. The way that works with a Roth is when you set it up and you send money into it, the money you've sent has already been taxed. It goes for your annual taxes the year that you earned the money. And so when it goes into the Roth account, it's been taxed once and for all. It will never be taxed again. So the money goes in there, it's been taxed. It grows tax-free for forever. So it can sit in that account and make dividends and make interest and grow and grow and grow over decades. And you don't get taxed on any of that growth as it's happening. Then when it comes time to take it out, that's another time when you could get taxed, but because it's already happened way long ago when you first put the money in there, it won't happen with a Roth. So if all that money's in a Roth, you'll never pay any taxes on it. That is your take-home pay. Your gross and your net become the same thing. The other way that people never talk about, frankly, we should be talking about this way more, where you can have this money all be tax-free, is if it's through long-term capital gains taxes. And so what this is saying is, even if you didn't have your $1.3 million in some kind of special tax-free savings account like a Roth IRA, if you have that money in there for long enough and you don't withdraw more than whatever the long-term capital gains tax rate is the year you're watching this, it's tax-free. So watch, let's pull up a chart. So check this out. For 2023, the long-term capital gains tax brackets are insane, because what this chart is saying is the 0% tax bracket for someone who's single, you can withdraw up to $44,625 per year from your investments. That's all profit. So of all of your money that's in there, not all of it's profit, not all of it's taxable. A big chunk of it is money that you put in. It's your principal. So even if you pulled out all $44,000 in pure profit that money has earned over time, you still get taxed $0. And then the numbers get really crazy. If you're married filing jointly, it goes up to $89,000 of investment profit you could pull out and have zero tax on. And the beauty of this is it doesn't even include the standard deduction. So if you're not itemizing your taxes, if you're like most of us and you just do the standard deduction, which is pretty simple, it's a pretty big beefy deduction, then if you're married, you could be raking in, I think the number is $109,000 and change, completely tax-free. And that's almost like the worst case. Remember, this is relating to investment income profit you've made. So it's like saying, oh, I only invested $1 million, the other 300,000 is all profit, and I took a big chunk out of that 300,000 this year. This is when that would get taxed. But by and large, it'll be a mix of taxable and non-taxable withdrawal that you're doing. And so it won't even be this bad. You could withdraw even more than that. So there's a secret superpower there in investing and in withdrawing that money that we really need to pay attention to, and we really need to be aware of our current difference between our pay, our take-home pay, and our needs in retirement, because the numbers end up skewing quite a bit in our favor whenever we do have all those things factored in and include taxes. But something we didn't technically cover is that if you are retiring early, let's say 45 years early, so you're going to do a 3.5% withdrawal rate. If you do have $1.3 million chilling, invested for you, doing what it needs to be doing, and you came from the average American income, which is around 55, 60 grand per year, you could do it. 1.3 million is enough for you to retire early on. It's just a whole lot more than the 500 grand we started with. That initial question of, is 500 grand enough? Turns out the answer is no. You need closer to 1.3 million. And if you're hearing that now and you're going, hey, Brendan, that's really nice. You did some math on your little iPad spreadsheet, and that's cute that you gave us a number. That number is massive, and who can ever have $1.3 million? Like, that number is so huge for the average person. How are we ever going to amass that quantity of money? And I'm with you there, because I think that it is a really daunting thing to think about having a 7-figure invested net worth. But my wife and I have never made crazy money. Like, together, we've never made over $200,000 a year. For the majority of our marriage, we made under 100 grand, and yet we still have a large sum of money invested. I won't say the exact amount because, frankly, people I know watch this, and so be a little awkward. But we have a lot of money invested. And I think the magic is knowing how to get started, how to get off on the right foot, to not take any big missteps, and to just get that ball rolling as early as possible, and then work on your income after that. Because it's like, once you're started investing, the game is just to keep going and to do more of it. Because it's pretty easy when you have everything set up to happen automatically, all that kind of stuff. It's just a matter of how much can I get a bigger and bigger shovel to shovel money into that account. But the real big hump in getting this started is to get going investing, to get started in the right things with the right accounts that make sense for you and your life. And so that's why I made my investing masterclass. Frankly, the whole making an online class thing is kind of cringy nowadays, but I'm really, really proud of what I made, because I honestly think it's the best thing out there for someone who's having a hard time figuring this out. How do I get started investing? What account do I choose? How do I know I'm not doing something that's going to hurt me later on? All those kind of basic introductory questions are answered. There's 26 class sections. It's like 2.5 hours long, so it's not short, but it's also going to take you less time than even reading like one book about the subject. So if you want to check that out, look in the description for a link. And if you're curious on how to get a bigger shovel, which is to say how to increase your income at your full-time job, then check out this video next that I made while walking around the beach in Coronado, California.